There's a lot of noise right now around the so-called US-India trade deal. Some are calling it a major breakthrough. Others see it as India bending to Washington. And with most of the details coming from Trump himself, it's hard to know what to believe. But when you look at the tariffs, the oil flows, and the numbers being thrown around, a very different picture starts to emerge. Here's what we actually know from the official readouts so far. According to Donald Trump, the United States and India have reached a new trade agreement that reshapes tariffs, energy flows, and long-term economic ties. The headline claim is that India has agreed to stop buying Russian oil and instead shift its energy purchases toward the United States. At the same time, Washington says India may also source oil from Venezuela, now under effective US control. What's important here is that none of these details were confirmed publicly by Narendra Modi. There was no parallel statement from New Delhi outlining timelines, volumes, or enforcement mechanisms. Everything we have comes from the American side, which matters when assessing how binding or detailed this arrangement really is. On the trade front, the White House says the US will cut import tariffs on Indian goods to 18%, down from 25%. In addition to that, the extra 25% penalty that had been tied to India's purchases of Russian oil would be fully removed. That leaves India with a baseline tariff rate of 18% when exporting to the US market. Then come the numbers, and this is where the story starts to stretch. Instead of detailed documents or parallel statements from New Delhi, what we get is a public readout from Washington.
As you all saw yesterday, the president struck another great trade deal with India. He spoke with Prime Minister Modi directly. They share a very good relationship. India committed to not only no longer purchasing Russian oil, but buying oil from the United States, also perhaps from Venezuela too, which we know will now have a direct benefit on the United States and the American people. And in addition to that, Prime Minister Modi committed to $500 billion of investments into the United States, including for transportation, for energy, and for agricultural products as well. So this is another great trade deal thanks to President Trump.
After hearing those statements, one thing becomes clear even before any deeper analysis begins. The scale of what's being described immediately invites closer scrutiny. Once you move past the headlines, the first real issue with this deal is scale. The numbers simply don't sit comfortably together. India's total imports last year were roughly between $800 and $900 billion. That figure covers everything India buys from the world in an entire year. Against that backdrop, the claim that India will purchase $500 billion worth of goods from the United States immediately stands out. That single commitment would represent well over half of India's total annual imports. And this is where the questions start piling up. Is this $500 billion meant to be spread over 3 years during Trump's term, or over a much longer period? Is it firm purchasing commitments, long-term contracts, or broad targets with no enforcement? None of that has been clearly explained. The confusion deepens when investment is added to the story. In some statements, the White House describes $500 billion in purchases of US energy, technology, agriculture, and coal. In others, the same $500 billion figure is described as Indian investment flowing into the United States. In certain readouts, both appear at the same time. That creates a completely different scale of exposure. If purchases and investments are separate, the total implied commitment rises toward $1 trillion. That would be larger than India's entire annual import bill and far beyond anything India has committed to a single partner in the past. Even without questioning intent, the lack of clarity matters. Deals of this size normally come with detailed timelines, sector breakdowns, and enforcement mechanisms. Instead, what we see is a shifting description of the same headline number. When the math is laid out this way, the deal already begins to look structurally unrealistic. And once energy flows are added into the picture, the economic logic becomes even harder to reconcile. To understand why this deal looks so lopsided for India, you have to look at energy first. In 2025, Russia was India's single largest oil supplier. India was importing more than 1.8 million barrels of Russian crude per day, much of it sold at a clear discount to global prices. That discount is not a side detail. It sits at the core of India's economic leverage. Cheap oil flows directly into cheaper electricity. That lowers costs across the economy, from factories to transport to heavy industry. Manufacturing becomes more competitive because energy is embedded in almost every step of production. Steel, chemicals, cement, and consumer goods all benefit when fuel costs stay low. Over time, this compounds into a structural advantage. There is also the refining angle. India does not just consume this oil domestically. It refines large volumes and exports fuel products to other markets, including Europe, often at much higher margins. The same applies to downstream industries. Plastics, fertilizers, and petrochemicals can be produced more cheaply when input costs are controlled. That pricing power gives Indian exporters flexibility when competing globally. This is why discounted Russian crude has been so valuable. It gives India room to maneuver. It allows exporters to stay competitive even when global demand softens. It also gives policymakers options during inflationary cycles, since energy costs feed directly into consumer prices. Walking away from that advantage carries consequences. Replacing discounted Russian oil with higher-priced US or Venezuelan supply pushes energy costs up across the board. Once that happens, manufacturing margins tighten, export prices rise, and competitiveness erodes. Even before geopolitics enter the picture, the economics alone point to a weaker position for India. And when global oil flows start shifting as a result, the ripple effects don't stop at India's borders. Once energy flows start shifting, the consequences spread quickly across global markets. In December alone, India bought more than $2 billion worth of cheap Russian crude. That volume does not simply vanish if India reduces purchases. Oil is a global commodity. When one buyer steps back, another steps in. This is where the China effect becomes unavoidable. Before Washington tightened control over Venezuelan output, China was importing close to 400,000 barrels per day of cheap crude from Venezuela. After the US took over those flows, China's imports from Caracas dropped to zero. The Trump administration has signaled that China can still access Venezuelan supply, but no longer at steep discounts. The roughly 20% price cuts that once made that oil attractive are now off the table. Now layer in a potential Indian exit from Russian oil. Russia still needs buyers, and China still needs energy. The adjustment is straightforward. China absorbs a larger share of Russian exports, including volumes that would otherwise have gone to India. To keep those barrels moving under Trump's sanctions, Russia has to sell at even deeper discounts, already well beyond $25 per barrel. And this is a win for China. Cheaper oil feeds directly into manufacturing inputs, transportation, and industrial production. That lowers the cost base across large parts of the economy. When energy is cheaper, exports gain flexibility. Pricing power improves, especially in sectors like chemicals, plastics, and heavy manufacturing. A stronger RMB was once seen as a risk to exports, but with input costs falling, that risk fades. As a result, China's trade surplus is more likely to grow rather than shrink. At the same time, the US is no longer the main driver of profit growth for Chinese exporters. Much of that trade is now routed through Hong Kong, which has become the core hub for China's transshipment and re-export activity. India faces the opposite dynamic. Higher-priced replacement oil raises costs across its economy. Manufacturing margins tighten. Export competitiveness weakens just as China's improves. Even if India gains slightly better access to the US market through lower tariffs, that does little to offset higher global production costs. From a broader view, this shift also reshapes geopolitics. Russia deepens its energy relationship with China. China gains leverage through cheaper inputs. And the intended pressure on Moscow ends up reinforcing Beijing's position. Once the oil is rerouted, the strategic balance tilts, and reversing that tilt becomes much harder. At the strategic level, this is where the deal starts to backfire for the United States. The stated goal behind pushing countries away from Russian oil is simple: cut Moscow's revenue stream and weaken its ability to operate. On paper, that sounds straightforward. In practice, the outcome looks very different. Russian oil revenues have indeed dropped by around 20%. That part is real. But the destination of those lost earnings matters just as much as the decline itself. The savings created by deeper discounts are not being captured by the US or its allies. They are being transferred almost entirely to China through cheaper energy imports. From Washington's perspective, this creates a strategic contradiction. The US can claim success by pointing to lower Russian income, yet the underlying trade routes remain intact. Volumes continue to move. Buyers remain in place. The only meaningful change is who gains from the price adjustment. This also limits US influence going forward. The result is a system that adapts around US pressure rather than bending to it. Russia continues exporting, global energy flows stabilize under new terms, and the US is left with fewer levers than before. That imbalance is now feeding into broader financial signals, where capital markets are beginning to price in longer-term shifts rather than short-term wins. As these trade and energy shifts settle in, the response from capital markets has been clear. Gold prices moved sharply higher. After falling to around $4,400, gold rebounded to above $4,950 in just 2 days. Silver followed the same direction, pushing toward $90 an ounce. That kind of move does not happen quietly or by accident. One of the triggers behind the initial drop was a sharp margin hike by the CME. Margin requirements on gold and silver futures were raised by more than 30%. For traders holding paper gold, that meant posting significantly more cash just to keep positions open. Many could not. Forced liquidations followed, and prices fell quickly as sell orders cascaded through the market. What matters is what happened next. Despite the higher margins, buyers came back almost immediately. Demand returned even in the paper market, where trading costs had just increased. That tells you something important. The move higher was not driven by leverage alone. It was driven by conviction. Markets are increasingly rejecting the idea of a durable, strong dollar. Interest rates cannot stay high indefinitely. The United States needs cheaper capital to manage its debt load, expand military spending, and finance strategic stockpiles, including rare earth materials. Keeping yields elevated for too long would put pressure on every one of those priorities. At the same time, China is sending a different signal. China's money supply has been growing at well over 8%, roughly double the pace of the US. Bank deposits in China yield around 2% at best. That leaves a large pool of capital searching for alternatives. Real estate remains risky, equities are already elevated, and excess liquidity has to go somewhere. Gold has become a natural destination for that flow. As Chinese capital looks for stability and purchasing power, physical assets gain appeal. When you zoom out, the pattern is consistent. Capital is positioning for ongoing currency debasement rather than a return to monetary tightness. That shift is gradual, but it is becoming harder to ignore. If the US-India deal really holds, the long-term shift is already underway. Energy flows won't stop, they'll reroute. Capital won't wait for certainty, it moves ahead of it. Some countries will benefit quietly, while others will pay later. The question now isn't what was announced, but what survives once markets settle. Did India truly sign away its advantage, or was this political theater dressed up as strategy? And as money keeps repositioning, is gold already telling us what comes next? Let me know who you think actually won this deal. And don't forget to hit the like and share the video. See you in the next one.